For more than 25 years, Michael Cicconetti was judge for a relatively small Ohio county, a little bit bigger in population than Kings County. And yet he regularly gained national attention. In 2005, he was even elected president of the American Judges Association. The media did a report on him and once said he had, quote, the wit of Judge Judy and the wisdom of Solomon. They might have been going a little overboard there. It was his sentences that went viral from time to time. Rather, it was the choices that he offered guilty defendants in his courtroom. They could choose jail for a crime or an offense they committed, or he would often give them the option to choose a more unusual punishment, which was meant to teach the defendant a valuable lesson. One woman, convicted of stealing from a church, was ordered to spell out, "I stole coins from this church" in coins, and apologize to every person who came to church one Sunday. One man who ripped off a Salvation Army red kettle would have to spend 24 hours homeless to understand who he was robbing from, as the Salvation Army was helping the homeless community there. But then there's the case of 19-year-old Victoria Bascom. She and a friend took a cab and skipped out on the fare. Cicconetti gave Victoria a choice. You can spend 30 days in jail, or you can walk 30 miles in 48 hours. 30 miles was the length of the trip that they had taken in the cab. At first, Victoria was upset, though she took the walk rather than the jail time. But later she said, "I'm lucky he gave me this option," because she avoided captivity in jail. Not only did Judge Cicconetti give her grace on that level, he even doubled down on merciful grace toward her. As she walked around a track at a fairground, he personally came on his day off and checked up on her. He saw that her pace would not be fast enough for her to finish in 48 hours. She wasn't going to fit the terms of her sentence, and so he reduced her sentence right then and there to 20 miles. There was a crowd on hand for Judge Cicconetti's final day of rulings. After the last gavel, everyone in the courtroom started clapping. Special day. Now our text this morning, 1 Samuel chapter 12, shows us Samuel's last day as judge over Israel. It doesn't end with clapping. It ends with crying as the nation is punished for their sin. But in his final ruling, Samuel gives the guilty defendants a choice. They could either walk with God, or they could swerve off the path into emptiness and ruin, a path that ultimately would end in captivity. Would they choose the walk? Will we choose to walk with God? Today we choose who we're going to serve, who we're going to follow. The choice set before us is following or wandering, following or swerving off God's path, or as the Lord puts it in Deuteronomy, I've set before you a choice, life or death. Choose life, God says to us. So let's take a look at what happened, what the Israelites did, and how that should stir our hearts to walk with the Lord. Verse 1, Samuel said to all Israel, I have carefully listened to everything you said to me and placed a king over you. Now you can see that the king is leading you. As for me, I'm old and gray. My sons are here with you. I've led you from my youth until now. Here I am. Bring charges against me before the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox or donkey have I taken? Who have I wronged or mistreated? Who gave me a bribe to overlook something? I will return it to you. Any good courtroom drama has the moment where, one of the attorneys calls the surprise witness. I call this person to the stand. Samuel doesn't do that, but he does something remarkable. He's judge, but he then puts himself on trial. He says, okay, here I am. I'm going to move from my judge's seat to the defendant's chair. I'm put on trial here. He invites anyone in the nation to bring an accusation of wrongdoing against him. Now, his words here are a powerful bookend. The very first thing Samuel said in his story, do you remember what it was? It was, here I am. And now though he'll have more to say to Saul and to David, and though he'll have more to do, this is his last day of official public ministry. And so on the final day of his official service as a judge, he once again says, "Here I am." Samuel has been faithful and upright in his choices before both God and man. When it comes to his official ministry here, he finished well. And that's always something that we want to be thinking about for life, is finishing well. A lot of Christians don't finish well. It's not just something that happens in the Old Testament. That's something that in the New Testament, Paul really exhorts us, man, run the race to finish this race. I have run my race. I have finished. And we want to be people who finish well. Friends, we are called to live righteous lives. You know, Samuel says, hey, take a look. Take a look at my life, my interactions with you, the things I've said, the things I've done. And he says, evaluate, judge me right here and now. We are called to live righteous lives, meaning we choose to do what God has commanded, to go God's way, to be like Jesus. We're not going to do it perfectly. Samuel didn't do it perfectly. But we are called to righteousness. We're called to live out the righteousness we've received from Jesus. Not just when it's easy or popular or when it costs us nothing, but day by day, that we choose to be conformed into the image of Jesus and allow the power of God to shape the way we live life and to do so in his righteousness. The Bible uses a term a couple of times. It says we are to live above reproach. That's a term we don't use very much, but here's how Paul describes and fleshes out that command in Philippians chapter 2. He says to us, do everything without grumbling and arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world by holding firm to the word of life. So we're saved, we receive God's righteousness. It's all his doing, it's all his power, it's all his accomplishment. We are not, making ourselves righteous. That's what the Pharisees tried to do. But we receive the righteousness of Jesus Christ. He's exchanged our filthy rags of sin for his beautiful white robe of righteousness. And then we live in that power, the power of the Spirit, choosing not to, like we talked about a moment ago, not to go into our spiritual closet and say, well, let me put on my rags of sin just for the morning because I'm really annoyed at my neighbor, right? But to say, okay, I'm going to remember that I've been clothed in righteousness and I'm going to do what the Lord has commanded and what Paul describes here. But man, reading those verses in Philippians, it sounds hard, doesn't it? It is hard because we can't do it in our own power. It's a high calling, but this is the Christian life. And God does give us the power to shine like stars in the world. He does give us the ability and the strength and the endurance to be blameless and pure among this crooked and perverted generation. We have the power we need to follow this command. It's not one way of living, it is the Christian way of living. Verse 4 says, you haven't wronged us, you haven't mistreated us, and you haven't taken anything from anyone, they responded. And he said to them, the Lord is a witness against you, and his anointed is a witness today, that you haven't found anything in my hand. He's a witness, they said. When the people demanded a king, they weren't only turning from a theocracy into a monarchy. They weren't only turning from God's authority over their future is what they thought they were doing. They were also rejecting the judges he selected. Remember, it was God who raised up the judges to help them, to deliver them, to have limited rule over the people. And Samuel was one of them. But the Israelites are saying, okay, not only do we kind of want to wiggle out of some of our covenant with the Lord, we also no longer want him to appoint judges. We're not into the judges anymore. We're going to go with this other system. They're making a mistake. And really, they're taking a very costly risk because you have a judge chosen by God, raised up by God, empowered by God to help the people, to deliver the people, to act on behalf of the people by the power of God. And you look at Samuel, this final judge of Israel. He says, man, he's never done anything to hurt us. He's never taken advantage of us. And yet the people still say, well, we're going to go with kings. We want a new set of guys to rule over us. Ironically, what was the first thing that Saul did when he finally started to lead as king? We saw at first he didn't want to be, king. He hid in the luggage. And then he went back home. He just started farming again. But we looked at it last time. What's the first thing Saul did when he started to lead? We would say, oh, well, he delivered them from Nahash and the Ammonites. Well, that's the big thing that he did. But what was the very first thing he did? He threatened to kill all their oxen. That's the first thing the new king did. So here's Samuel, filled with God's wisdom, filled with God's power, filled with God's grace. He has a spotless track record. He says, have I ever taken anything from any of you? Have I ever done anything to harm any of you? And all of them say, no, you've never done any of that. And yet Israel says, we still want a king. And right away, that king said, I'm going to kill all your oxen if you don't do what I want. All of you, not one of you, but all of you. It's an amazing contrast between, what Israel had experienced in the past and what they were going to experience for centuries in the future. None of Israel's kings would live up to the integrity of Samuel. Now, not all the judges were good. Samson, not a great guy. The judges were also fallible, but it's an important contrast we're seeing here. Samuel, who had a spotless track record of integrity versus the kings that Israel was choosing. None of the kings would live up to that level of generosity and integrity that Samuel did. Not even David. Not even David. David's going to make some terrible mistakes. Most famously, what is he going to do? Reach out and snatch the wife of another man and then have that man killed. And many of the kings in their future would be terrible for the nation. But that's what happens when we stop pressing into our relationship with the Lord, when we go our own way. We end up settling for less. We think this is going to be a great plan. This is going to totally work out. But we end up settling for less than what God has planned for us. God has better planned for you than you can plan for yourself. The thoughts that he has towards you, the good he intends towards you, the grace that he has towards you. The Lord loves you. He loves your family. He has a great desire to do a great work in your future. And so when we move away from him and wander off of his path, we settle for less and we inevitably bring loss upon ourselves and our futures. Verse 6, Samuel said to the people, the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and who brought your ancestors up from the land of Egypt is a witness. Now present yourselves so I may confront you before the Lord about all the righteous acts he has done for you and your ancestors. So Judge Samuel has been cleared of any wrongdoing, so he leaves the defendant's table. He goes back up to the courtroom seat, and now he formally brings charges against the nation. He says, okay, now you guys are on trial. When he says, I'm going to confront you, he's using judicial language. The charge was, okay, now we're going to take a look. Have you been faithful? Samuel had been, but more importantly, he's going to say, the Lord has been. The Lord has been faithful. Do you measure up to the faithfulness of your God? The people throughout this section of the book, they've acted like they have no other choice other than to demand a king. What are we going to do? How are we going to overcome our enemies? We're going to be swallowed up. Nahash the Ammonite's coming and the Philistines are coming. We have to have a king. We demand it. And Samuel warned them. He said, you don't want to do this. You have no idea what you're asking. And they say, no, we want it. They persisted. They demanded. And Samuel, though, is going to show that God had been nothing but faithful and powerful and generous and present with them for hundreds and hundreds of years, over and over again. If you had a neighbor who out of the kindness of his heart mowed your front lawn every single week for the last 20 years, and he always did a good job, and he never, made you feel bad about it, and he never asked you anything back from it, would you go hire someone to do the same job for $200 a week? That would be foolish, right? That would be silly. But that's, on one level, the basic point Samuel is about to make to them. He says, you have no idea what you're about to give up as you turn away from a God who loves you, who's generous towards you, who has always been faithful to you. One of the best things we can do to maintain a healthy spiritual attitude towards God is to remember the great things he has done for us. He talks there, and he's going to talk more about the great work of righteous faithfulness that God has done on their behalf. And that's one of the reasons we try to sing so often about the deeds of God, the great things he has done. Because when we as people do not fill our hearts with memories of God's faithfulness, we tend to forget. We tend to turn numb. We tend to get distracted. But worse than that, complaining rushes in. Discontent rushes in. Doubt rushes in. Frustration and jealousy and greed and all of these other things rush in, where joy and thankfulness and gratitude and worship should be. And when those things rush in, error follows, mistakes follow, sin follows. Verse 8 says, when Jacob went to Egypt, your ancestors cried out to the Lord, and he sent them Moses and Aaron, who led your ancestors out of Egypt and settled them in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God. So he handed them over to Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, to the Philistines, to the king of Moab. These enemies fought against them. And then they cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned, for we abandoned the Lord and worshiped the Baals and the Ashtoreths. Now rescue us from the power of our enemies, and we will serve you. So the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel. He rescued you from the power of the enemies around you, and you lived securely. But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, was coming against you, you said to me, no, we must have a king to reign over us, even though the Lord your God is your king. How many things does the Lord have to do for me before I will trust him? How many times does he have to show faithfulness to me? How many times does he have to reveal his goodness to me before I no longer make decisions motivated by fear or doubt? It's so obvious when we read the Old Testament, isn't it? We read these stories, whether it's of the Israelites in the wilderness or in the Judges, whether it's of Lot or, all of these different stories. We read them and we think, this is so obvious, just trust the Lord. We watch Abraham in a time of famine go down to Egypt, and we sit, from our vantage point on this side of the page, and we say, no, of course you don't go down there. Just trust the Lord. But I confess that the same unfaithfulness lives in my heart, the same propensity to worry that God won't really come through for me this time. And so I better go out and do something else. I better solve this problem on my own. And so this is what Samuel is saying. He's like, man, look at what the Lord has done. Here's what he did, here's what he did, here's what he did, here's what he did, up to and including like yesterday. Nahash the Ammonite, that was like yesterday. It might even been the same day. The people were afraid of Nahash. And we saw last time, he was a scary guy, a serious enemy. And yet what had the Lord done? Rescued them. Before noon. They had a fight, and before lunch it was over. A guy who had terrorized 2.5 tribes on the other side of the Jordan. He's gouging out eyes. They couldn't fight. All they could do was run, and they had nowhere else to run. And then, it was like brunch, and he's like, yeah, they're all gone. They're all dead. The victory is so complete that not 2 Ammonites were found together. Not only that, as Samuel discusses different individuals here, whether it's Hazor, the Philistines, Moab, and then lists these judges, what he points out? What had the Lord done? He had rescued his people from enemies in the north, enemies in the south, enemies in the east, enemies in the west. He's showing them a geography. He's like everywhere around you. And then even among you, the Canaanites, the Lord has saved you. He has helped you. He has never failed. Faith doesn't mean we never have trouble. It means that in trouble, we trust our Lord. That we don't run off and say, okay, I've got to go do this thing because this makes sense to me. It seems right in my own eyes. But to say, okay, I'm going to follow the Lord. Psalm 46 gives us a beautiful picture of faith. Let me read a couple of those verses. God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not be afraid, though the earth trembles and the mountains topple into the depths of the seas. That's a bad day. If we went outside and, the earthquakes just didn't stop and the Sierra Nevadas were crumbling, the psalmist says, I still am not going to be afraid. That's the faith that we want. Now, we recognize it is very difficult to have that level of faith in the hardships of life, in the pressures of life. But that is the faith that we want, the faith we aspire to, one that sees the works of God, not just right now, but sees the works of God in the past, and therefore that faith is at rest, knowing that he is God, right? Psalm 46 goes on to say, be still and know that he is God. And so if you're in some sort of crisis today, it is not time to withdraw from Jesus. It's never time to withdraw from Jesus, but it's in those moments of difficulty or crisis or danger or frustration that we think maybe it's time for me to make a change. Maybe it's time for me to do something drastic and dramatic. I don't really believe that the Lord is going to come through for me. And it is not the time for you to do that. It is time to press into him, to press closer into his embrace, and to follow him with greater sensitivity. Meanwhile, we get a reminder here of how God does things. You know, God could just speak a word and Nahash doesn't exist. He could just speak a word and, everything is fixed, instantly, supernaturally. And sometimes he does that. But most of the time, he decides to use his people to do his work, you and me. Most of the time, that's how he wants to do what he's going to do through the lives of those who follow him. Notice in each of these troubles that are listed by Samuel, whether it was Egypt or the Philistines or Moab or Nahash, what did God do? He appointed and sent servants. Now, he empowered them and he, spoke to their hearts and helped them and gave them strategy and gave them equipping and all of that, but he appointed and sent followers to go do his work. And so what has God appointed you to do? What has God sent you to do? It's something. Some calling that he has placed on your life. Being appointed is not just an Old Testament thing that happened to Samuel and Samson and Saul and those guys. It's a New Testament thing as well. It's a church era reality as well. In John 15, Jesus said that all of us, he's speaking of his disciples, that's us, all of us, he said, are appointed to go and bear fruit. And so the question is that happening in my life? Is that happening in your life? God has appointed you. God has sent you. God has called you for what? Well, that's between you and the Lord. As you follow after him, he shows you where to go, what to do. And I don't even just mean go geographically. I don't mean that you have to go to a different people group. You have to go across an ocean. We can be sent in our own home. We can be sent to the neighbor next door. The sending is a spiritual sending. But are we doing what we've been appointed to do? Verse 13. Now, here's the king you chosen, the one you requested. Look, this is the king the Lord has placed over you. God was always faithful, always good, always right, always victorious. Would that be true of every king? Would that be true of all the kings? Okay, they've got Saul and he has one victory under his belt. Great. And we've seen Saul is stepping into that role, and so far he's doing pretty good. Didn't love that part where you threatened to kill all my oxen, but okay, you delivered us from Nahash. But the Lord is always faithful for hundreds of years. Always good, always right, always victorious. Is that going to be true of all the kings? They might be brave, they might not be brave. They might be virtuous, they might not be virtuous. They might be holy, they might not be holy. They might be generous, they might not be generous. Quite a gamble. But there was no turning back. This choice was locked in. This wasn't a moment where the people could say, hey, all right, we take it back, undo, we'll just not have a king anymore. The Lord is saying, hey, listen, you've persisted in this, you've demanded it, I tried to stop you, but you said we will have it, and I'm going to give you what you want. It's locked in now. Verse 14, if you fear the Lord, worship and obey him. And if you don't rebel against the Lord's command, then both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God. However, if you disobey the Lord and rebel against his command, the Lord's hand will be against you as it was against your ancestors. And so amazing. Even now, God would be gracious to Israel. They had made a terrible, unfaithful choice despite God's track record, despite the warnings. And yet the Lord says, look, I'm still keeping the doors open to you. I'm still willing to interact with you and be your God. They could still walk with him and follow after him. He would still lead and help and provide for them. And so, commenting on this verse, one commentator noted, everything has changed and nothing has changed. Because God does not change toward us. You know, everything was changing in Israeli society, how they're going to organize their nation and their political, hierarchy and all of that was all changing. And the judges were going away, the kings were coming, the prophets were coming, and there was a lot that was going to happen. God did not change. He still reached out to them. He still loved them. He was still willing to work with them. Now he says to fear the Lord. That's the command here. To fear the Lord in the Bible does not mean God wants us to cower in fright as if he's a wild animal about to tear us apart. The connotation here means awe and reverence toward who God is. And here, the fear of the Lord is demonstrated by a life of worship and obedience and discipleship, following. Those are the things that Samuel references. Following God's leading as you worship, as you obey. That's what Samuel means by if you fear the Lord. Verse 16. Now therefore, present yourselves and see this great thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Isn't the wheat harvest today? I'll call on the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain so that you will recognize what an immense evil you committed in the Lord's sight by requesting a king for yourselves. Samuel called on the Lord, and on that day the Lord sent thunder and rain. As a result, all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. When Judge Cicconetti sentenced Victoria to walk 30 miles, that was only part of it. There was still a price to pay. There was the matter of the fine. She would have to pay the $100 she owed to the cabbie. And she would also have 4 months of probation. Now, it could have been worse. She could have gone to jail for 30 days, which would impact her all of her future. She was 19 years old. She's already an adult. So that's a big deal for jobs and future and all of that. And so he did show grace, but there was still a price to be paid. God offered his people grace. Incredible grace they did not deserve, but there were still consequences, a judicial fine, as it were. Why? Is God being vindictive? Is he throwing a tantrum here to rain on their wheat? No. Remember what Hebrews tells us, and so does Proverbs. The Lord disciplines the one he loves. Why? Because God is not at all interested in letting us throw our lives away as we wander from him. He forgives our sin, but sin brings consequences. And one of the first things that sin does is destroy the spiritual fruit that God is trying to grow in our lives. Not forever, doesn't mean that we'll never grow fruit again, but as the Lord's doing a work in your life today and in this season of your life, in my life, if I go out and start sinning, it's going to destroy those pieces of fruit that the Lord is trying to grow in me right now and in this season of my life. And so this wheat harvest would be damaged, if not destroyed. That's what happens when we rebel against God. Destruction of harvest, damage to the fruit he wants to grow in us. It's not because God is being unkind or vindictive. It's because this is what happens. This is what happens when we rebel. This is what happens when we go our own way. The Bible makes it so clear. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. And God the whole time is saying, I have the way that leads to life, to a thriving life full of eternal power and eternal contentment and all sorts of fruitfulness. That's what I want. What was the first command? Be fruitful and multiply. Like the Lord's like, this is why I put you here, so you can thrive and so I can love you and you can love me and you can have this perfect relationship in a perfect creation. Oh, you don't want to do any of that? Oh, you want to ruin everything? Okay. Guess what? There's thorns now. Guess what? There's difficulty now. Guess what? There's sin and death now. But guess what? I'm going to do something about it so you can be saved from death, so you can be saved from the path of darkness that you've put yourself on. Now, the Lord was also establishing an important aspect of this new system. Remember, they said, we don't want to be a theocracy anymore. We want to do our own thing. And the Lord said, hey, I'm going to give you what you want on one level, but I'm not just going to give up the throne. he was still in charge. He was still God. He was still in charge of Israel. And so he's making it clear here that the king would lead, but the prophet would have power the king did not have. And we see that throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. The kings may have a lot of worldly power. They might have chariots and swords and spears and soldiers. And then Elijah walks in, says it's not raining for 3 years, and walks out, and it doesn't rain. And Samuel says, rain's coming today, and the wheat harvest is in trouble, and it happens. And so the Lord was establishing, I am still in charge. You can't actually get away from me, is what he's showing them, which of course is true. Verse 19, they pleaded with Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servants, so we won't die. For we have added to all our sins the evil of requesting a king for ourselves. You know, another reason God had to bring this judgment on them is that they still hadn't confessed. They still hadn't owned up to what they had done. Finally, now that the Lord has done this, they realize, all right, we get you. We confess. And, you know, that conviction and confession, those are good things, step in the right direction, but there's a sad aspect to what they say here. Because back in chapter 7 was another scene where we saw Samuel and all the people of Israel. And the Philistines come, and the people are very afraid. And do you know what they said? They said to Samuel, don't stop crying out to the Lord, our God, for us. But what do they say here? We sense the rift in their relationship with the Lord. They said, pray to the Lord, your God, because we're afraid and because we've sinned. Of course, there were still faithful people in Israel. This text isn't suggesting that Samuel was the only real believer. There were other faithful believers in the nation. But remember, God deals not only with individuals, but with nations. And generally speaking, nationally speaking, this nation had turned away from the Lord. The result is never good. And so we, on the one hand, want to be like Joshua. Hey, choose for this day who you're going to serve. As for me and my house, I'm going to serve the Lord. Okay, that's what I can do. I can't force my neighbor. I can't force my governor. I can't force anybody to follow the Lord. I can follow the Lord. But then let's remember, okay, we need to pray for our nation. And we need to do what we can to promote righteousness in our nation, because righteousness exalts a nation. And when a nation turns from God, judgment is the result. Verse 20, Samuel replied, don't be afraid. Even though you have committed all this evil, don't turn away from following the Lord. Instead, worship the Lord with all your heart. Don't turn away to follow worthless things that can't profit or rescue you. They are worthless. The Lord will not abandon his people because of his great name and because he has determined to make you his own people. Wow, the grace of God. Even after all of this, the Lord said, you are still my people. They had said, we don't want to be your people. He says, too bad, I have determined to make you my special people. No matter what mistakes you have made, you can always turn to God. He is ready to save. He is ready to embrace us. He is determined to love you. There's nothing you can do to separate yourself from the love of God. Now listen, he won't force you to receive his love, and he won't force you to love him in return, but he has his mind made up. He will always keep his promises if you are willing to receive them. Both to us and to the nation of Israel. God has specific promises to the nation of Israel, the ethnic descendants of Abraham. He will keep those promises, and thank God that he will, because that means he will keep his promises to us. But it's a choice. Just like in Deuteronomy, I've set before you today life and death. Choose life. Just like in Joshua, choose this day whom you will serve. You can follow Jesus or you can turn away from him. The Hebrew is vivid here, we're told. It can be translated, swerve away from mere emptiness, after mere emptiness. So Samuel says, you can either follow the Lord, or then he says, you can turn to follow worthless things. And the phrase there can mean swerve away after mere emptiness. And it's remarkable. He uses the same verbiage and terminology that describes the world before creation, that things were formless and void. He uses a word like that. He says, so you can follow God, or you can swerve into the formless void of worthlessness. And so we can either continue walking after Jesus as he leads us on a solid path, straight and narrow, but a path that leads to life everlasting, joy overflowing, or we can swerve off that path into a ravine of emptiness that leads in ruin and captivity. Captivity to sin, captivity to the devil. Verse 23, as for me, Samuel said, I vow that I will not sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I will teach you the good and right way. Above all, fear the Lord and worship him faithfully with all your heart. Consider the great things he has done for you. However, if you continue to do what is evil, both you and your king will be swept away. Judge Cicconetti admitted that at one point he almost quit the bench. Particularly with the rise of the opiate crisis, he said he became so depressed with the people coming through his courtroom. He was frustrated because he says, I just can't help some of them because of the choices that they're making. But he decided to stay and do what he could case by case. So Samuel would no longer be leading the people as a judge, but he wasn't done being part of God's work. They had rejected the Lord. They had rejected Samuel too. It hurt his feelings. It hurt his heart. But he said, okay, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep praying for you. I'm going to keep interacting with you. He was old and gray, but he still had things he could do. He was actively gracious and compassionate like the Lord was. Sometimes we become limited in our lives by resources, by age, by disease, by circumstances. That's okay. The Lord still gives all of us power to serve him in prayer. That's real service, in encouragement, in all sorts of ways. No matter what stage of life or stage of faith we find ourselves in, here is another call to serve God, to worship God, to follow God, to fill our hearts with gratitude, to consider his works, to fear the Lord, to do what Samuel is asking Israel to do. You know, Victoria Bescom had a friend in the cab that day that they committed their crime. They committed it together. The friend did not take Judge Cicconetti's deal. Now, the news didn't follow up with what happened with her. I'm guessing she was a minor. But man, what a shame that she chose captivity over taking a walk. They did report, yeah, she didn't take the deal. What a shame. Every day we have the same choice that we see presented in this story, growth or waste, discipleship or some detour that leads to a dead end or the ruin of spiritual fruit, uselessness in God's hands. And so fear the Lord. Worship him, proclaim his goodness and power in all his righteous acts, follow his leading, hold firm to your refuge and strength, give him the throne, give him the gavel, give him the helm of your life. He will not disappoint you. Let's pray.